I just came in to deal with one matter, and I hope that you will allow me to just treat with one matter which I think is necessary to be addressed. I trust that the ministers who were here would have dealt with the matters of cabinet. The matter I wish to deal with is not a matter of cabinet, and that's why I wasn't really supposed to be a part of the cabinet communication. But I think it is sufficiently important for me as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago to respond today to a very disturbing headline in today's Guardian. This is still a free country, and people are free to express their views. It's one of the attributes of our free democratic society. So I'm taking no issue with any person's view on their assessment of any situation. However, the headline in today's Guardian is more than just an expression of view. It's an expression of view which can have the effect of misrepresenting the country's history and the facts of certain situations with respect to public administration, public policy, racial solidarity, and the peace and stability of Trinidad and Tobago. And it's against that background that as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, and more so as leader of the People's National Movement, this party in our 60th year, we, and I say we here meaning all the population, must take note of the accuracy of the opinion expressed as fact that Patrick Manning was racist. I do not appoint myself as defender of Patrick Manning, but as defender of the public record, I think I'm duty-bound to respond to that banner headline in The Guardian that Patrick Manning, long-standing Prime Minister and Member of Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, was in fact a racist. A lot of our young people would have read that statement today, and when they would have read the evidence to support that statement, it is quite possible that many of them, not just young people, but many adults, might have read it and digest it as fact. And if they do, it is quite possible that their behavior and relationship with the rest of our society could be somehow influenced, not for the better. And that is why I'm here today. There are 6 or 7 items of evidence which are supposed to support this statement that Patrick Manning was racist. And the major one is that he closed down the sugar industry with the intention of and the effect of bringing hardship to the Indian population of Trinidad and Tobago. Well, I take objection to that statement because that statement is not supported by fact. I was the Minister of Agriculture in the Patrick Manning government. And I go back a bit further. Sugar in Trinidad and Tobago was a private sector business, and it engaged a large section of the East Indian population, and the industries as owned by the private sector, a number of small companies were going out of business in the private sector. Had nothing to do with the race. It had to do with the economics of the industry. But because of the tremendous negative effect that that would have had on Trinidad and Tobago and the people involved, in 1975, a P&M government bought up all these small estates and created a state company called Carney 1975 Limited. And what that action did, it allowed Trinidad and Tobago which had a sugar industry that was dying, to survive for another 20 years with significant billions of dollars of state-injected funding, state support. I don't know how, and I've never seen that action on the part of a PNM government being described as a racist salvation or a racist action, because it has nothing to do with race. It was economics. And it was the communities involved, whoever they were, that the government of the day, which happened to be a PNM government, had intervened in this way and created that extension of life for the sugar industry of Central and South Trinidad. That industry was surviving, even with government's injection of the billions of dollars along the years, was surviving mainly on the fact that the export component of the sugar, as produced by Caroni Limited, went to two markets. The larger portion went to Europe, and the smaller portion went to the United States. And in both of these markets, there were special prices being offered to countries like us, where higher than market prices and prices way beyond the production costs allowed us to produce that sugar, sell it in these preferential terms, and continue the industry. Then came the discussion on the global stage of the changing of terms of trade for agricultural products as part of the coming of the WTO. It took a number of years, but there were indications and warnings and preparations that a time will come when these preferential prices will no longer be available. And Trinidad and Tobago was required to put its house in order so as to be able to survive when the WTO and the preferential arrangements became reality, and the loss of those arrangements. I was the Minister of Agriculture from 1991 to 1995. And in responding to this development, which came after a number of attempts by other governments and other ministers, there was the Dukaran plan, the Frank Rampersad plan, and so on and so on. And under the Patrick Manning government, that was the Manning's first term of office as Prime Minister, we set about to get an agreement for the survival of the sugar industry in that difficult environment, called the Tripartite Agreement, where the government, labor, and the company came together and hammered out this tripartite agreement to try and get the industry to survive in those turbulent waters. One of the signatories to that agreement was Basdio Pandey, who was opposition leader and head of the All Trinidad Sugar Workers Union. After that, there was some issue involving some back pay. And whereas the tripartite was meant to look at a future for sugar in a different environment, the back pay became the issue for Mr. Pandey, and he withdrew his signature from the tripartite and refused to cooperate with it. And of course, the company limped along as it was, absorbing approximately between $500 million and $1 billion a year, and so on and so on. And while we did improve the pension for workers, they got pay increases, and so on, the main thing was the markets were not there. So the European Union moved out preferential treatment, and we had a date by which that was going to happen. And then came the US. So the preferential treatment in preferential markets died. That meant, even with the support from the Treasury in Trinidad and Tobago, with the loss of the markets, the sugar industry in Trinidad and Tobago had come to a point of no return. It's against that background that in 2002, a decision was taken to close the sugar industry in Trinidad and Tobago. It didn't only happen in Trinidad and Tobago. St. Kitts had a sugar industry. They had to shut it down. Barbados shut down most of theirs, and a portion of it which was always private sector, in the private sector, they had no state sugar industry. It was the private sector, funded by a bank. And on many seasons, there were difficulty in funding their industry, and the crop was dependent on whether the bank would fund it or not. And they still limp along with a bit of sugar in Barbados. But most of the industry shut down. And elsewhere across the world, that's what happened. So for somebody to get up today and say that the closing of Carney 1975 Limited was a racial act to suffer Indian people is close to sedition, meant to create racial discord and to disturb the peaceful fabric of Trinidad and Tobago. And as the minister involved, as I just described, and working under Prime Minister Patrick Manning, that allegation cannot be supported by the facts of the day. I wouldn't go into the details of what happened at the time of the closure, where in bringing about the closure, a number of matters were dealt with in a very generous way. The voluntary separation was enhanced. The pension was improved, and it cost the taxpayers over $2 billion of support for persons who were going to lose the industry. And even today, as I speak to you now, the last amount of money is still to come. The European Union money that was meant to come into the Treasury to replace the Treasury money that was used to bring about the closure and the soft landing, that money was being made and is being made to the sugar industry and to those same communities. So it is quite wrong and misleading for anybody to try to rewrite our country's history and to use that development as I described, which was purely in response to external changes and market negatives, and saw a humane government and a humane country responding to a challenge like that, and to bring that up today and to portray it as something which was some person's racist action is short of terms I would not like to use. So I put that on the record. The sugar industry in Trinidad and Tobago enjoyed its origin after 1975 by a governmental action that intervened when the private sector was closing it down. That intervention gave us 20 more years, and the 20 best years of sugar, because that's when sugar workers really earned money and got proper attention in Trinidad and Tobago. Carney 1975 Limited. Before that, it was close to peonage and feudal systems taking place. So, it's still a free country if persons want to interpret it that way, but I simply put the facts on the record. The other fact was that Manning tried to arrest Chief Justice Sharma. I simply want to put on the record that the removal of a Chief Justice in Trinidad and Tobago involves the office of Prime Minister. Doesn't matter who is the Prime Minister. But if a Chief Justice has questions to answer, which brings about any consideration of removal, it involves the office of Prime Minister. And in the case of Chief Justice Sharma, the record will show that the allegation of Mr. Sharma's misconduct did not come from Prime Minister Manning. It came from the Director of Public Prosecution, Jeffrey Henderson, who indicated that Mr. Sharma had done matters or done things which were deemed to be unacceptable and which triggered action which could have led to his removal. Those are the undisputed facts. Secondly, Okasie Paul. Yes, Okasie Paul was put under house arrest. That was a decision taken by a government of which I was a part. Because, again, it's still a free country. There are other points of view. The point of view which I, and I presume Patrick Manning, my leader at the time, was that we were not going to allow Speaker Okasie Paul to remove the mandate of a PNM government which we earned in a general election. Okasie Paul, sitting in the seat of the Speaker in Trinidad and Tobago, took it upon herself to reduce the government's majority so that the government will fall. She started by suspending Ken Valley And on the day when she suspended Ken Valley, she indicated openly that when the Parliament resumed the next time, she was going to suspend me and Keith Sobian and Wendell Motley. You remember that? And we had to intervene to prevent the Speaker from doing that. I know there are others who didn't like it, but I tell you, we took action as a government to protect ourselves from being suspended from the Parliament by a Speaker who had gone rogue. And that is the country's history. The historians will discuss that, and history will have been made at the time. The bottom line is, the fact of the matter is, there was a Speaker who virtually walked out on the House, ran out of the chair, so as to prevent the government from properly adjourning the House, and send the threats which we got directly from her, that I will suspend you at the next sitting, simply to reduce the government's majority, so that an opposition motion could be carried to dissolve the Parliament. So that I put for the record of those who were born after that time. Feroza Ramjohn, Patrick Manning acting as a racist with Feroza Ramjohn. What is the story? Feroza Ramjohn was a public servant who the same Patrick Manning, who is supposed to be a racist, approved her relocation from Port of Spain to London on promotion. He wasn't a racist when he did that. He was a prime minister approving the promotion of a citizen. After that was done, the security services brought to Mr. Manning's attention that in investigating a matter involving corruption with respect to Trinidad and Tobago's passports, that officer seems to have been implicated. Mr. Manning, in response to that information from the security services, withdrew the approval for Mrs. Ramjohn to go to London. Mrs. Ramjohn felt aggrieved, and she, quite correctly, as she was entitled to, she went to court on the matter. And she pleaded in the court that action was taken against her to her detriment without her being given the opportunity to be heard. The court agreed with her, and the court ruled that Mr. Manning should have given her the opportunity to be heard. The court never adjudicated on the matter of the passports themselves and the allegation made by the Security Council, by the Security Department. It said that Mr. Manning acted improperly when he acted on the security services advice without giving her the opportunity to be heard. Louis Leasing and I-95.5. Again, I was in the cabinet. I think we were a new government, if my memory serves me right. We were a new government. And a cabinet note came because maybe the very morning of that cabinet, I-95 was a broadcasting station, broadcasting on a license which was held by Hilson Phillips of Tobago. Hope you remember our country's history. A license was granted to Hilson Phillips in Tobago to run a station in Tobago. That was his intention. But instead, I think he leased the license to the principals at I-95, and I-95 came into being broadcasting on a license that somebody else had. They had business problems as business partners or whatever they were. And Hilson Phillips withdrew his license from 95.5. And this new broadcasting station, which had introduced talk radio to Trinidad and Tobago, suddenly had to shut its door. Today for tomorrow. They came to the government and asked for a license of their own. The relevant minister, Minister Hedridge Burrow at the time, he brought the note to the cabinet indicating what I just told you, that the license was withdrawn and they need a license to continue. And they being a broadcasting station, in business, people are going to lose their jobs and so on and so on. The cabinet was asked to approve a license. I was there. Minister Imbert was there. Minister Robinson Regis was there. Minister Imbert asked the question, and we all accepted the question. Is this the only license that is in the pipeline? We did not agree at the moment. We asked the minister to check and see if there were other licenses that were there waiting to be approved. The minister reported back to the cabinet that there were no other licenses that were approvable on that day and at that time. On that basis, the cabinet approved the license for I-95.5, and that station has been broadcasting ever since. Immediately after that was made known, there was a complaint from Mr. Sat Maharaj that he had an application inside from the Mahasabha and that the Mahasabha was being denied the license and so on. The cabinet was a little disturbed because we had asked whether there were other licenses in the pipeline, and we were told that there were none. And when we investigated the matter, this is what we found out. There was, in fact, an application where Mr. Maharaj was an interested party. I'm not sure if it's on behalf of the Mahasabha or himself. However, Dr. Seth at the time was tasked in finding out why that was not approved. Turned out the application was only partially completed. And there were certain pertinent bits of information that were required to complete the application. And therefore, the public servants who spoke to Minister Bureau saying that there was not another license to be approved, they would have taken the position that because the application was incomplete, it was not a license that could have been approved. And that's why they said no to us. Dr. Seth, on Mr. Manning's instruction in my presence, was told to contact Mr. Maharaj and have him fill out the application form, and once it is filled out, the cabinet will consider favorable outcome. I was told that that was done under the hand of Dr. Seth, and there was a refusal to go along that route. And the next thing we knew, in the face of allegations of racism, this matter ended up in the Privy Council, and the Londoners agreed that the license should be granted, and we stayed damned for the rest of our lives that we didn't give the Mahasabha a license because we're racial. That is the story of the Mahasabha license. The cabinet acted in the way I just described. I was there, I was part of that cabinet. Then, of course, we're hearing another well, I don't even want to go down this road. Divine Echoes is a Christian band to play Christian music. My knowledge of Divine Echoes is a dance band, playing music that people dance to recreate the big band of the era of golden local music of the Clarence Curvan and John Buddy Williams and the Pete the Flute and Frankie Francis. The whole idea was to recreate that kind of music so that people can get to dancing, whether you agree or not. It wasn't a Christian band playing Christian music. It's a dance band playing back in times for Christian and whoever else, Muslim, Hindu, to dance. That was the whole idea. Today is being used as proof of racism in Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, the report of the Ryan Laguerre effort is proof that Patrick Manning is racist, and of course, by extension, the PNM. And what did the report say? In today's paper, it says that Indian people were not being promoted in the public service to higher levels. That statement is a bold statement on its own is not the full story of our history. And it also doesn't tell you that Mr. Kenneth Lala was the chairman of the Public Service Commission longer than anybody else. And unless, of course, he was discriminating against Indians, I don't know what is the basis for using that particular statement to support today's headline. I simply want to say, in conclusion, that this is the confirmation that there is free speech in this country. But this kind of free speech, in trying to rewrite our history, and rewriting it in a way to paint us as a people who have done less than we could have to maintain peace, stability, and brotherly love in Trinidad and Tobago, is not good for this country. And I reject Mr. Maharaj's attempt to defend what he thinks he's defending. But I will defend this country's record, especially when I was a part of that record. Thank you very much.